The morning sun cast long shadows across the human colony of New Haven as Jake Morrison walked through the dusty streets. He wore the simple brown uniform of the Colonial Defense Force, a uniform that made him look more like a security guard than a military commander. The Zephyrian patrol ships flew overhead in their usual formation, their sleek silver hulls gleaming against the blue sky. Jake watched them pass and allowed himself a small smile. The aliens had no idea what was really happening beneath their noses. For 30 years, humanity had played the role of the weak, younger species. They bowed when the aliens demanded it. They paid the heavy taxes without complaint. They allowed their worlds to be governed by creatures who saw them as nothing more than useful animals. Every human colony had learned to act helpless and primitive. Every human soldier had been trained to lose battles in convincing ways. It was the greatest act of deception in galactic history. Jake entered the command center, a building that looked run down from the outside but held secrets that would shake the galaxy. Lisa Grant was waiting for him, her face showing the same tired expression she had worn for years of diplomatic meetings. She had just returned from another humiliating session with the Zephyrian High Chancellor, where she had been forced to beg for reduced tribute payments while the reptilian commander looked down on her with obvious disgust. "How did it go?" Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. "The same as always," Lisa replied. "Chancellor Vextar rejected our request. He said humans need to learn their place in the galaxy. He wants another 20% increase in food shipments from the agricultural worlds." Jake nodded. The Zephyrians always wanted more food, more raw materials, more proof that humanity knew its place as servants to their betters. What they did not know was that every demand they made, every insult they delivered was being carefully recorded. Humanity was building a case for what was coming. "Any word from Admiral Tucker?" Lisa asked. "He sent the signal an hour ago," Jake said quietly. "Operation Revelation begins tomorrow." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. Tomorrow would change everything. After 3 decades of careful planning, humanity would finally show the galaxy who they really were. She thought about all the times she had been forced to bow and scrape before alien commanders, all the times she had bitten her tongue while they called humans weak and stupid. Tomorrow, those same commanders would learn the truth. Deep beneath the colony, in tunnels that the Zephyrians did not know existed, thousands of human soldiers were making final preparations. These were not the poorly equipped colonial guards that the aliens had seen. These were elite troops with advanced weapons and armor that surpassed anything in the known galaxy. They had trained in secret for decades, passing their skills down from father to son, mother to daughter. They were ready for war. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood in the hidden hangar bay looking at her ship. To any Zephyrian patrol, it would appear to be a simple cargo vessel, but beneath its disguised hull lay the most advanced stealth frigate ever built. Its engines could push it to speeds that would make alien interceptors look like they were standing still. Its weapons could punch through any known armor, and it was just one of thousands of ships hiding throughout human space. Amy thought about her grandfather, who had been one of the first humans to encounter the Zephyrians. He had watched their ships arrive and immediately understood that humanity was not ready for open conflict. So he had made a choice. He had ordered all human forces to stand down and pretend to surrender. It had taken incredible discipline and courage to appear weak when they wanted to fight, but it had given humanity time to prepare. The real human military had spent 30 years building in secret. While the aliens thought humans were struggling with basic spaceflight, human engineers were developing technologies that would seem like magic to their oppressors. While alien commanders mocked human weapons as primitive projectile throwers, human scientists were perfecting energy weapons that could crack moons. The deception had been perfect. Ben Tucker sat in his office aboard the hidden command station, reviewing the final battle plans. As admiral of the real human fleet, he had overseen the greatest military buildup in history. Thousands of warships lay concealed in asteroid fields and nebulae throughout human space. Millions of troops waited in underground bunkers. Weapons that could destroy entire fleets sat silent and unused. Tomorrow, all of that would change. The Zephyrians had grown arrogant over the years. They barely bothered to patrol human space anymore, confident that the weak colonists posed no threat. Their fleets had grown soft and lazy. Their commanders had forgotten how to fight a real war. They were about to receive a very painful education. Ben looked at the reports from his intelligence officers. Every major Zephyrian base had been infiltrated. Every patrol route had been mapped. Every commander's personal habits had been studied. When the attack began, the aliens would find themselves facing an enemy that knew their every weakness. The plan was simple in concept but devastating in execution. At dawn, every human ship would shed its disguise and reveal its true nature. Every hidden weapon would activate. Every secret base would open its doors and release its contents. In a single coordinated moment, humanity would transform from helpless victims into the apex predators they had always been. Jake walked to his window and looked up at the Zephyrian ships still circling overhead. The alien crews were probably laughing about the pathetic humans below, making jokes about how easily they had conquered this system. By tomorrow evening, those same crews would be dead or captured. Their mighty empire would be reeling from attacks across dozens of star systems. The galaxy would finally see what humans were truly capable of. The deception was almost over. Soon, the Zephyrians and their allies would learn that they had not conquered humanity. They had simply been allowed to think they had, while the real human military prepared for this moment. The weak and primitive species they had dismissed was about to become their worst nightmare. Jake smiled as he watched the alien patrol ships disappear over the horizon. They had no idea that this would be their last peaceful flight over human territory. Tomorrow, the Empire would begin to shake. Dawn broke over New Haven Colony just like any other day, but Jake Morrison knew this would be the last normal sunrise in galactic history. He stood in the command center watching the chronometer count down the final minutes. At exactly 0600 hours, Admiral Tucker's voice would echo across every hidden human base in known space. The 30-year deception would finally end. The Zephyrian patrol ships began their morning flight over the colony right on schedule. Commander Vextar led the formation in his personal cruiser, the same arrogant reptilian who had insulted Lisa Grant just yesterday. He flew low over the human settlements in a show of dominance, never imagining that sensors were tracking his every move from underground bunkers. 60 seconds to revelation, Jake announced to his team. Around the command center, human officers sat at stations that had been disguised as simple communication equipment. Hidden screens flickered to life, showing the positions of Zephyrian forces throughout the system. Every alien ship was being watched. Every crew member was being counted. Amy Rodriguez waited in her disguised cargo ship, her hands steady on the controls despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Around her, the asteroid field that had been her hiding place for months suddenly came alive with activity. What the Zephyrians had dismissed as space rocks began to move and shift, shedding their outer shells like molting insects. The countdown reached 0. All units, this is Admiral Tucker. The voice came through crystal clear on every human frequency. Operation Revelation is now active. Show them who we really are. Amy's fingers danced across her control panel as her ship began its transformation. The false hull plating fell away in carefully designed sections, revealing the sleek predator beneath. Her cargo vessel became a stealth frigate bristling with weapons that could crack planets. All around the asteroid field, hundreds of other ships were doing the same thing. Commander Vextar was in the middle of explaining human inferiority to his bridge crew when his sensor officer began screaming. The Zephyrian's yellow eyes widened as he saw his tactical display light up like a festival celebration. Ships were appearing everywhere, materializing from what had seemed like empty space just moments before. Impossible, Vextar hissed. Humans do not possess such technology. His weapons officer was already trying to target the emerging human vessels, but his systems could barely track them. The human ships moved with impossible speed and grace, their energy signatures unlike anything in Zephyrian databases. These were not the primitive chemical rockets the aliens had observed for 30 years. Amy's squadron struck first. Her finger pressed the firing stud and her ship's main gun spoke with the voice of human fury. The magnetic accelerator cannon fired a projectile at 20% of light speed, crossing the distance to the nearest Zephyrian patrol ship in less than a second. The alien vessel's shields flared briefly before failing completely. The kinetic round punched through the hull like it was made of paper. Dan Peterson watched from his weapons console aboard the UES Liberty as the Zephyrian cruiser began breaking apart. Atmosphere vented from dozens of hull breaches, while secondary explosions tore through the dying ship. The aliens had never faced weapons that delivered such devastating kinetic energy. Their shields were designed to stop energy beams and plasma bolts, not solid projectiles moving at relativistic speeds. Target destroyed, Dan reported with satisfaction. Moving to secondary target. All across the system, the pattern repeated itself. Human ships that had been hiding for decades suddenly revealed themselves and opened fire with weapons the Zephyrians had never imagined. Railguns that fired metal slugs at impossible velocities, fusion torpedoes that could turn a battleship into expanding plasma, energy cannons that carved through armor like hot knives through butter. Commander Vexitar screamed orders as his formation crumbled around him. His tactical officer reported that similar attacks were happening in 17 different star systems simultaneously. The humans had coordinated this assault across thousands of light years. It was a level of military organization that the Zephyrians had never credited them with possessing. On the surface of New Haven, Kate Sullivan threw off her disguise as a simple farmer and revealed the combat armor hidden beneath her work clothes. Around the colony, thousands of other civilians were doing the same thing. The Zephyrian ground forces suddenly found themselves facing not helpless colonists but highly trained special operations troops. The alien base outside the colony had been built to intimidate the local humans. Its walls were decorated with Zephyrian battle standards and its guards carried weapons designed to awe primitive species. But when Kate's assault team hit the main gate, those same weapons proved useless against human armor that could shrug off direct energy blasts. Major Richards led his team through the base's corridors. While confused, Zephyrian soldiers tried to understand what was happening. These humans moved like trained soldiers, not frightened farmers. They used tactics that the aliens had studied in their military academies. They fought with a precision and coordination that spoke of decades of preparation. The humans have been planning this for years. A dying Zephyrian captain gasped to his commander. We never saw them coming. In space, Amy's squadron had finished mopping up the patrol ships and was moving on to harder targets. The main Zephyrian battle station orbited the fourth planet, a massive construct that had served as the regional command center for 30 years. Its commanders had watched the destruction of the patrol fleet with growing horror, but they still believed their heavy defenses could stop any human attack. They were wrong. The battle station's shields were impressive by alien standards, capable of stopping the combined firepower of a dozen conventional warships. But Amy's ships were not conventional. Her torpedo salvo included weapons that phased through solid matter and detonated inside the station's core. Her railgun barrage struck with such force that the station's structure began to buckle and twist. Jake watched from the surface as the battle station broke apart in a series of brilliant explosions. Pieces of debris rained down through the atmosphere like falling stars. The symbol of Zephyrian dominance over this system had been reduced to scrap metal in less than an hour. Across human space, the story was the same. Alien patrol fleets disappeared without trace. Occupation bases fell to coordinated ground assaults. The species that had ruled over humanity for 30 years suddenly found themselves facing an enemy they had never truly known. The weak and primitive humans they had dismissed were revealing themselves as the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The first strike was complete. The Zephyrian Empire was reeling, and humanity was just getting started. News of the human uprising spread through the Galactic Coalition like wildfire. Emergency meetings were called on every major world as alien leaders struggled to understand how their weakest subjects had suddenly become their greatest threat. The Zephyrian Empire, which had ruled over dozens of species for centuries, found itself facing the unthinkable possibility of defeat at the hands of primitive humans. Emperor Zexcon received the reports in his throne room on the capital world of Zephyr Prime. The massive reptilian ruler had lived for over 300 years and had never faced a serious challenge to his authority. His claws scraped against the arms of his throne as he listened to Admiral Korath deliver the devastating news. 17 systems have gone dark, my emperor, Korath reported, his voice shaking with fear. The humans have destroyed every patrol fleet we sent to investigate. Our ground forces have been wiped out across the entire outer rim. They are moving faster than we can respond. Zexcon's yellow eyes burned with rage. The species he had personally dismissed as harmless farmers were now destroying his empire. Ships that had taken decades to build were being reduced to scrap metal in minutes. Soldiers who had served the empire faithfully for generations were being slaughtered by humans who were supposed to be cowering in fear. How is this possible? The emperor demanded. Our intelligence report said the humans possessed only primitive chemical rockets and projectile weapons. How are they destroying our most advanced warships? Admiral Korath had no answer. The tactical reports made no sense. Human ships were moving at impossible speeds and firing weapons that seemed to violate the known laws of physics. Their soldiers fought with equipment that was decades ahead of anything the Coalition had developed. It was as if humanity had been hiding their true capabilities for generations. Clark Williams watched the Zephyrian response fleet assemble from his command ship, hidden deep in the Titan Nebula. His sensors could penetrate the swirling gases that would blind alien detection systems, giving him a perfect view of the Empire's desperate attempt to crush the human rebellion. 500 Zephyrian warships were gathering for what their commanders believed would be the final battle of a short war. "Admiral," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving similar reports from observation posts throughout Coalition space. The aliens are pulling ships from every sector to deal with what they are calling the human crisis." Clark smiled grimly. The aliens were reacting exactly as human strategists had predicted. They were so shocked by the sudden reversal that they were making the same mistakes that had led to their downfall in the first place. They still thought of humans as a regional problem that could be solved with overwhelming force. They had no idea that humanity had been preparing for this exact scenario for 30 years. The Zephyrian battle fleet began moving toward human space under the personal command of Admiral Korath. The reptilian commander was confident that his overwhelming numerical advantage would quickly end the rebellion. His ships carried the most advanced weapons in the Coalition arsenal. His crews were veteran soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds. How could primitive humans stand against such force? Dr. Helen Murphy monitored the approaching fleet from her research vessel, hidden on the edge of the system. Her instruments were detecting energy signatures and weapon configurations that would help human commanders plan their response. What she was seeing confirmed her worst fears about alien arrogance. The Zephyrians were approaching this battle like it was a simple police action, rather than a war against an unknown enemy. "They are not taking proper precautions," Helen reported to Admiral Williams. "Their formation is designed for intimidation rather than defense. They are broadcasting their positions on standard frequencies. They seem to believe that superior numbers will be enough to guarantee victory." Clark nodded as he studied the tactical display. The Zephyrian fleet was indeed impressive by conventional standards, but human weapons were anything but conventional. The aliens were about to encounter technologies that their military textbooks insisted could not exist. Captain Steve Harris prepared his destroyer squadron for the flanking attack that would announce humanity's true capabilities to the galaxy. His ships were equipped with dimensional fold drives that could bend space itself, allowing them to appear behind enemy formations without crossing the intervening distance. It was technology that the aliens would, declare impossible right up until the moment it killed them. The Zephyrian fleet entered the outer edge of human space expecting to face desperate colonists with improvised weapons. Instead, they found empty space. Their sensors detected no enemy ships, no defensive positions, nothing but the usual background radiation of interstellar space. Admiral Korath began to suspect that the humans were planning some kind of trap. He was right, but he had no idea how deadly that trap would be. The first sign of trouble came when Korath's sensor operator reported strange readings from what appeared to be empty space. Energy signatures were appearing and disappearing in patterns that made no sense. Space itself seemed to be twisting and folding in ways that violated everything the Zephyrians knew about physics. "Impossible," Korath muttered, but his instruments did not lie. Steve Harris gave the signal and his squadron emerged from folded space directly behind the Zephyrian formation. The alien ships suddenly found themselves under attack from a direction that their commanders insisted could not exist. Human weapons struck from angles that geometry said were impossible, hitting vital systems before the aliens could even react. The Zephyrian fleet turned to face this new threat, but more human ships were already appearing in other impossible locations. Amy Rodriguez led her stealth frigates in an attack from what the aliens thought was solid space, her ships materializing from dimensions that Zephyrian science said were purely theoretical. Admiral Korath watched in horror as his carefully planned formation dissolved into chaos. His ships were being attacked from directions that his tactical computers could not calculate. Human weapons were striking through shields that should have been impenetrable. His crews were panicking as they faced technologies that seemed like magic. All ships, "Concentrate fire on the human vessels," Korath ordered. But his weapons officers were having trouble locking onto targets that flickered in and out of normal space. The battle was over in less than an hour. 300 Zephyrian warships were destroyed or disabled, while the remainder fled in panic back toward Coalition space. The Empire's most powerful battle fleet had been crushed by an enemy they still did not understand. Emperor Zexicon received the news of the defeat in stunned silence. His greatest admiral was dead, his finest ships were floating debris, and the humans were still advancing. For the first time in his long life, the ruler of the Zephyrian Empire began to feel afraid. The destruction of Admiral Korath's fleet sent shockwaves through the coalition, but it also raised questions that demanded answers. How had humanity developed such advanced technology while appearing primitive for so long? The answer lay buried deep beneath Earth's surface in ruins that were older than any known civilization in the galaxy. Professor Nancy Wright descended into the underground complex beneath the Sahara Desert, her footsteps echoing through corridors that had been sealed for millions of years. The walls were covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when observed directly, written in a language that predated every known form of communication. She had spent 15 years learning to read these markings, and what they revealed had changed everything humanity thought they knew about their origins. The ruins belonged to a species that had called themselves the First Ones, though Nancy suspected that was just a translation of a concept too complex for human minds to fully grasp. These beings had seeded the galaxy with life long before the current civilizations had even evolved. They had built weapons that could crack stars and defenses that could stop time itself, and according to the records Nancy had decoded, they were humanity's true ancestors. General Paul Thompson stood in the main chamber of the complex, watching his technicians activate systems that had been dormant since before Earth had developed complex life. The ancient machinery hummed with power that seemed to come from nowhere, drawing energy from dimensions that human science was only beginning to understand. These were the weapons that would reshape the galaxy. "How many of the gravity disruptors are operational?" Paul asked his chief engineer. 12 at full capacity, General," came the reply. "Each one can generate fields strong enough to crush a battle fleet or tear apart a planet's crust. The quantum scramblers are also online. We can now unravel matter at the atomic level across entire star systems." Paul nodded grimly. The weapons were beyond anything the current galactic civilizations could imagine, but they came with a terrible responsibility. The First Ones had built them for a war against something so dangerous that they had chosen to disappear from the galaxy rather than face it again. Now humanity would have to decide whether to use such power against the Coalition. The Coalition's reinforcement fleets were already moving toward human space, convinced that sheer numbers would overwhelm whatever tricks the humans might have. Emperor Zexicon had assembled over 2,000 ships from every member species, stripping defenses from across the galaxy to create the largest armada in recorded history. He believed that humanity's advanced technology must have limits, and those limits would be reached when faced with such overwhelming force. Clark Williams monitored the approaching fleets from his command center, now relocated to a massive space station that had been hidden inside a hollow asteroid for decades. The station itself was built using First One technology, its hull composed of materials that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Coalition sensors could detect it only when it chose to be seen. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported, "the Coalition fleet includes ships from 47 different species. They have pulled vessels from every sector, including their core defense fleets. If we defeat this force, they will have nothing left to throw at us." Clark studied the tactical displays showing the massive enemy formation. 2,000 ships against humanity's few hundred seemed like impossible odds, but the humans were no longer fighting with conventional weapons. The ancient technology changed everything. Amy Rodriguez had been chosen to lead the first test of the gravity disruptors in actual combat. Her ship now carried a device that could manipulate gravitational fields across vast distances, turning the forces that held planets in orbit into weapons of unimaginable destruction. The responsibility was terrifying, but the survival of humanity depended on using every advantage they possessed. The Coalition fleet entered the outer rim of human space expecting to face the same advanced but comprehensible technology they had encountered before. Instead, they found themselves confronting forces that violated every law of physics they understood. Space itself began to twist and fold around their ships as human gravity manipulators activated. Admiral Vexthok, the reptilian commander leading the coalition force, watched in horror as his flagship's hull began to buckle under gravitational forces that had no visible source. Around him, other ships were being compressed into dense spheres of matter or stretched into impossibly thin ribbons of metal and flesh. His crews were screaming as they experienced forces that their bodies were never meant to endure. "What are they doing to us?" Vexthok demanded, but his science officer had no answer. The readings on their instruments made no sense. Matter was being compressed and expanded in patterns that should have been impossible to create or control. Steve Harris activated his ship's quantum scramblers and watched as an entire section of the coalition fleet simply ceased to exist. The weapons reached across space to unravel the atomic bonds holding enemy vessels together, reducing mighty warships to clouds of free-floating particles in seconds. There were no explosions, no dramatic deaths, just the quiet dissolution of matter back into its component elements. The coalition forces tried to retreat, but human consciousness projectors were already targeting their command ships. These weapons attacked the neural patterns of living beings, rewriting thoughts and memories to turn enemies into willing servants. Alien commanders who had entered the battle determined to destroy humanity suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by the desire to surrender and serve their new human masters. Dr. Helen Murphy monitored the battle from her research station, her instruments barely able to track the exotic energies being unleashed. The weapons humanity was using operated on principles that would require decades of study to fully understand. They were seeing the remnants of a technology so advanced that even its creators had feared what they had built. Within hours, the mighty coalition fleet was destroyed, converted, or in full retreat. Ships that had seemed invincible were reduced to cosmic dust. Crews that had served their empires faithfully for generations now worshipped their human conquerors with religious devotion. The galaxy's greatest military force had been annihilated by weapons that seemed more like magic than science. Nancy Wright emerged from the ancient ruins carrying data tablets covered with First One symbols. The record she had decoded told the full story of humanity's origins and their destiny among the stars. The current galactic civilizations were children compared to the beings that had once ruled this galaxy. And humanity were their chosen inheritors, bred and guided across millions of years to reclaim what had always been theirs. The coalition would never recover from this defeat. Their remaining fleets were already surrendering, rather than face the incomprehensible power that humanity commanded. The galaxy belonged to its rightful rulers once again. 6 months after the first human strike, the galaxy had been completely transformed. The mighty Zephyrian Empire lay in ruins, its proud fleets reduced to scrap metal floating in the void. Emperor Zexcon had died in the final battle for his homeworld, when human forces demonstrated their ability to destabilize the system's star. The sight of their sun flickering and pulsing under human control had broken the will of every remaining Zephyrian commander. Admiral Ben Tucker stood on the bridge of the EES Dominion, humanity's new flagship that dwarfed any vessel the galaxy had ever seen. The ship was built using First One technology, its hull shimmering with materials that existed in multiple dimensions. Around him, alien dignitaries waited in carefully ordered lines, each hoping to be granted an audience with their new human overlords. The transformation had been swift and absolute. Species that had once looked down on humans as primitive farmers now competed for the privilege of serving in human fleets. The Zephyrians who had survived the destruction of their empire begged to be allowed to continue existing under human rule. Even the proud warrior race of the Korthak had laid down their weapons and offered tribute to avoid the fate that had befallen those who resisted. Fleet Admiral Jake Morrison, promoted after his brilliant coordination of the initial strikes, oversaw the integration of former coalition territories into humanity's expanding empire. Every day brought new surrenders as alien species realized that resistance was not just futile, but suicidal. The humans possessed weapons that could unmake entire star systems and the will to use them against anyone who challenged their authority. The process of establishing human dominance had been surprisingly easy once the aliens understood the true scope of humanity's power. The demonstration at the Zephyrian homeworld had been necessary to show the galaxy what would happen to those who refused to submit. When the system's star began to pulse and flicker under the influence of human stellar manipulators, Every remaining coalition fleet had immediately ceased hostilities and requested terms of surrender. Kate Sullivan, now promoted to general, managed the ground forces that occupied former alien strongholds throughout the galaxy. The troops under her command no longer needed to hide their true capabilities. They wore armor that could withstand planet-cracking explosions and carried weapons that could level mountains. Most alien populations submitted without resistance once they saw what humanity's soldiers could do. The ancient ruins on Earth continued to reveal their secrets under Professor Nancy Wright's careful study. Each new discovery reinforced humanity's rightful place as the galaxy's dominant species and provided additional technologies that made their former oppressors look like children playing with broken toys. The first ones had left behind blueprints for weapons that could crack reality itself, defenses that could stop time, and engines that could move ships between dimensions. The latest translation confirms our suspicions, Nancy reported to the Human High Council during their weekly briefing. The first ones were not just our ancestors, but our creators. They designed humanity specifically to inherit the galaxy when they chose to move beyond this dimension. Every human carries genetic codes that allow us to interface with their technology. We are literally bred to rule. The revelation explained much about humanity's rapid technological advancement once they had access to the ancient ruins, where other species would have taken centuries to understand even basic first-one principles. Humans instinctively grasped concepts that had taken the original builders millions of years to develop. They were living keys designed to unlock the galaxy's greatest secrets. Amy Rodriguez commanded one of the new human battle fleets that patrolled former Coalition space. Her ships were works of art as much as instruments of war, their hulls flowing with energy patterns that created beautiful displays across the electromagnetic spectrum. The aliens who saw them pass often fell to their knees in worship, recognizing the divine nature of their new masters. The human empire was nothing like the brutal dictatorships that had preceded it. Aliens who submitted willingly were treated well and allowed to maintain their cultures and traditions as long as they acknowledged human supremacy. Those species that proved useful were given positions of honor in the new galactic hierarchy. The humans had learned from the mistakes of previous empires and ruled through a combination of overwhelming power and carefully managed mercy. Dr. Helen Murphy established research stations throughout human space to study the exotic technologies that were reshaping galactic civilization. Her teams included scientists from dozens of alien species, all eager to contribute to humanity's growing understanding of first-one science. The knowledge they gained would ensure that human dominance lasted for millions of years to come. The galaxy's new capital was established on Terra Nova, a world that had been specially terraformed using first-one environmental controls. The planet's cities were marvels of engineering that combined human creativity with ancient technology to create structures that seemed to defy gravity and logic. Alien ambassadors who visited the world often wept at the beauty of what humanity had accomplished. Emperor Ben Tucker, as he was now known, held court in a palace that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The building could expand or contract based on need, and its walls displayed real-time images of any location in the galaxy. From his throne, he could observe the farthest reaches of human territory and ensure that his will was carried out across thousands of light years. The former coalition species had been reorganized into a new hierarchy based on their usefulness to humanity and their willingness to accept their new place in the galactic order. The most cooperative races were granted the privilege of serving directly under human commanders. Those who had resisted were assigned to labor details, rebuilding the worlds they had helped destroy. During the brief war, Clark Williams managed the ongoing exploration of ancient first-one sites throughout the galaxy. Each new discovery added to humanity's already overwhelming technological advantage and revealed more about their creators' ultimate plans. The first ones had seeded hundreds of worlds with ruins containing weapons and knowledge that would take thousands of years to fully explore. As Ben Tucker looked out at the stars from his throne room, he reflected on the incredible journey that had brought humanity to this moment. 30 years of careful deception had given way to 6 months of conquest that had reshaped the entire galaxy. The species that had once dismissed humans as primitive animals now served them with religious devotion. The empire had not just shaken, it had fallen completely. In its place rose something far greater, a human dominion that would last until the stars themselves burned out. The galaxy had finally returned to its rightful rulers, and this time, humanity would never again pretend to be weak.